when my son became a teenager, I had a really hard time with communicating with him. So I was seeing this counselor and I was complaining to her and I was telling her all my woes. And she introduced to me something called the when then approach. It's very simple. We're back here at the Successful Stylist Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ambrosia Carey. Today, we're going to hang out, just you and I. We're going to have an intimate conversation, and I have a story that I want to share with you. But first, I want to give a shout out to one of our amazing reviewers. Racy Lay said that this is her new favorite podcast. She said, really love the topics and artists featured on this podcast. A lot of great stories shared and making a difference in our industry. Thank you so much, Racy Lay, for the awesome reviews. And just as a reminder, for those of you who give us a podcast review, we will be giving you a lovely shout out. So thank you so much for helping the right people find us. Today, I have a story to share with you that is cutting close to home because it happened 5 years into my career. And here I am crossing that 20-year threshold, and I still remember the story to this day. I feel like this is a story that a lot of us who are service-based, industry-based, beauty-based, we're all going to relate to this one. It was a time when a boundary was crossed, and instead of holding true to my boundary, I ended up going the confrontational route. And it was a huge learning lesson for me, but it was also a really great reminder in some ways that I can maneuver through situations and how this is really a relationship that we have between another person. It's not just us servicing someone. And even though it's going to happen from time to time, I do feel like there's a huge difference between boundaries and confrontation. And there's a blurry line where a confrontation can begin once a boundary is crossed. I had this client that I'd been seeing for several years, and she was about to get married. Now, to give you guys a little bit of context, every time that I saw that client on my books, my heart would sink. I would just be like, oh gosh, I hope she has something nice to say. Every time I saw her, she had something combative. Every time I saw her, she had something negative to talk about. Every time I saw her, she would critique what I did with her hair. Never once did I feel like she enjoyed herself or liked the process of what we were doing with her hair. And I remember thinking to myself, if this appointment doesn't go well, then I'll refer her to someone else. If she's unhappy this time as well, I'll just offer to reimburse her and ask her not to come back. If this doesn't go well, I'll go to the manager and I'll say something. So in my head, I already knew that a boundary had been crossed, but I didn't know how to deal with it. So I was just dealing with my own internal confrontation, my own internal conflict. Now, this client came in to get her hair done 3 days before her wedding, and she asked me to give her a haircut. And I mentioned to her that typically it's best to not get a haircut done within days of your wedding. And I suggested that we just cut it next time. Well, she insisted on cutting it. She said that she needed a fresh cut for her wedding. And I took the most minuscule amount off the ends purposefully because I was very reluctant. I got about 3/4 of the way through the cut and she yelled out at the top of her lungs, "What have you done?" I froze. I didn't even know how to respond to her. I said, well, I don't know what you mean. And she said, you just chopped all my hair off. I looked at her cape and I picked up the hair that I cut, and it was a dusting. You could see it on my fingertips. And I said, this is all that we've taken off today. I took less off today because, again, I didn't want to remove too much length right before you got married. So she said to me, well, you can't fix this. My hair's ruined. And I said, what can I do for you? How can I? And she said, well, there's nothing you can do. And I said, okay, well, I'll go ahead and talk to the manager and I won't charge you for your services today. And she says, well, of course you're not going to charge me. Why would you charge me for this? My hair looks awful. So instead of me trying to defend myself, I took a step back and I apologized profusely. I walked over to the manager and explained what happened. Fortunately, we had a manager, so I was able to pass a baton over to someone. But that evening I went home and you best believe I cried. I cried and I cried and I thought about it. It haunted me. I thought about it for days. I let a couple of days pass and I decided to call this client. I wanted to call the client because I wanted to offer to her to go to her wedding site and do her hair for her for free. I was going to style it for her. I thought, if I could make her feel good on her wedding day, maybe this will undo the feeling that she had when she left. And it was because I was uncomfortable with the situation. So I contact her and she immediately lays it into me. She starts yelling at me, telling me how much of an awful person I am. And the only reason why I'm calling her is because the owner made me call her. And I explained to her, that's not the case. No one asked me to call you. I'm calling you on my own. And as a matter of fact, I'm calling you because I would like to do your hair for free. I'm going to offer my services to you. I'll go to your wedding site. I'll style your hair for you for free. I just want you to feel beautiful on your wedding day. I want you to feel good. And she said, well, why would I ever want you to touch my hair again? You ruined it. Then she said something to me that stuck with me for the rest of my life. You ruined my hair, you ruined my wedding, and you ruined my life. She said it just like that. The only thing that I could muster up after trying to defend my integrity was, well, I think you're being a little dramatic. And so she hung up on me. Of course, I never saw that client again. Of course, she got reimbursed for all of her services. And in the end, it was a huge learning lesson for me. But it haunted me. It stuck with me. And the reason why is because I don't feel like I listened to my gut. I didn't hold up to my own integrity, my own boundaries. I was defending my integrity to another person who wasn't right for me. And that brings me to this whole confrontation piece. Don't be combative, be clear. The minute that you start giving into the confrontation, the minute that you allow somebody to be combative with you, that's when you start to generate the energy toward the argument. And now you're giving permission to argue. Now you're giving permission for somebody to push back. I learned this really interesting approach from my counselor years ago. And this actually had to do with parenting. Being a single mom is not easy. And when my son became a teenager, I had a really hard time with communicating with him. So I was seeing this counselor and I was complaining to her and I was telling her all my woes. And she introduced to me something called the when-then approach. It's very simple. When you can talk to me respectfully, then we can have a conversation. When you finish your homework, then you can play your video games. So the when-then approach doesn't necessarily have to be your communication style to somebody. It can also be a boundary inside of yourself. So when that line is crossed, then you do this. When someone treats you this way, then this is how you respond. So when this client sat in my chair and would tell me all the things that she didn't like about her hair, then I would ask her, well, what do you like? And when she said to me, I don't like anything, then I say, it looks like we're not a good fit. Let me recommend someone else. It makes things so clear. And that brings me back to my point that I said earlier, to be clear, not combative. What's interesting is that I learned a lot from this client, even though it was heartbreaking, even though it traumatized me in a way, even though it made me want to quit hair. What I learned is that if you have to defend your own integrity, then the relationship has been severed already. You should never, ever have to defend your own integrity. And that brings me to my next point, that relationships work both ways. If you are the only person putting the effort in and the relationship is not being reciprocated on the other end, you're not a good fit. It's just like a date. You know, I've talked about this before. I'm sure you guys who are listening on the other end know exactly what I'm talking about. And you might even think of some clients that you're trying to maneuver yourself. That doesn't mean that you have to love everyone who's sitting in your chair. That doesn't mean that you have to love everyone you're servicing. However, if you cross the threshold where you have to defend your own integrity, something in the relationship has been crossed. A line has been crossed. That is the piece that I really want to stamp into my younger self. I want to remind myself of, I want to remind you guys of, if you have a relationship like that in your life where you're forcing it, then how do you want to maneuver? How do you want to do things differently? Even though this is one example of many examples that have happened in my career, and I'm sure similar to yours, this is such a good example of where boundaries come from to begin with. Boundaries are created by what we choose to put energy into or what we choose to not. And as soon as we cross that threshold where we put energy into something and a boundary has been defined, Now we're crossing into confrontation land, and it never feels good. And as soon as we step into confrontation, that's where we're defending our integrity. So I want to encourage you guys, if you feel confrontational about a client, then ask yourself, is this person even the right fit for me? Do we have a relationship? Have I set a boundary and stuck with it? Have I honored my own boundary? So I want to take a moment to thank you guys for listening to my story, my rant about my confrontational client that kind of turned me upside down for a moment. And even though it was a hard lesson, it was a lesson that taught me how to communicate differently. It was something that started my point of curiosity and how I could honor my own integrity better, on how I can set better boundaries for myself and recognize in the future how to deal with them. We know that not everyone is for us and we're not for everyone. And it's really important that we stay true to that. Otherwise, we're not going to feel good about what we do. And as I share this story, it makes me realize that this is one of the reasons why marketing became so important to me. Marketing to the right person, when you guys both have a really awesome relationship and you enjoy each other and you can't believe that they're paying you to do their hair, it becomes effortless. That is what I want for you guys. That's what I learned for myself. You can be choosier about your clients when you learn how to market to the right people. So as a final send off before I shut it down, I actually have a video that I am going to drop in the show notes, and you can go ahead and enter code SSAPOD, SSAPOD, and you can get that video for only $19. So that is available only for you listeners. And that is a huge thank you to you guys for supporting the podcast, being a part of the conversation, and dropping reviews to us. This means the world to us. I want to continue to encourage you guys to dream big, set goals, and take action. I'll see you guys next Tuesday. Take care.